All right, everyone, welcome to session 3 of Intro to Coding Live, the JavaScript version. It is 6:06 p.m. Central Time. It is it is Thursday, October 12th. So this is session 3. There's only a handful of slides here for this session, but we are going to probably talk for the first 45 minutes to hour of class tonight. And then just like we did in session 2, we're going to start getting into challenges again. For session 3, we have built-in methods, and I believe we're going to do arrays. And then on next Monday, we're going to start talking about all of the built-in methods on objects. All right, so, and again, we've already kind of touched on this at a very high level, but we're going to start diving in and taking a look at what these built-in methods do. So a method is basically a function that is bound to any given data type: string, number, array, object. Methods and like basically like a function is a standalone function, a reusable piece of code, like what we covered. A method is a function on one of these data types, so it's basically like a built-in function or a built-in method. That is the correct terms for it. But if you are talking about a function, you say method, or you're talking about a method and you say function, they do get used pretty interchangeably, even if it's not 100% correct. Like, people are going to understand what you're talking about. So methods tend to always perform actions on or using the value being stored in that data type. The action performed may either mutate the data in place without returning a new value, or it can not mutate the existing value, but return a brand new value, which you would need to store in a variable yourself, right? And there is a whole concept in software development languages about being basically like mutable or immutable. And we'll talk about that more, and I'll call it out when we're looking at the different built-in methods that we're going to be working with. But it's basically to mutate a piece of data in place means that you're actually changing that data. All right. And if it does not mutate the data in place, typically what it'll do is it returns a new value. So if you have something that takes your data and multiplies it by 2 and returns a new value, if the data is 5 and then the new value is 5 times 2, the new value would be 10. So the original value is still 5, and then you have a copy of it times 2 that is now 10. Versus if it mutates it in place, it would take that 5, times it by 2, and then replace that 5 with the 10, and that 5 no longer exists. All right. And so it's whether or not you're replacing something or making a copy of it, is if it's going to be mutated or not. All right, so a few built-in examples. For strings, there is concat, which honestly, I knock yourself out if you want to use concat. It adds 2 strings together to make 1 string, aka concatenate. All right, so if I have let A equal Charles and let B equal Kubiak, and I say console.log A, I'll see Charles, right? And then if I do dot concat B, there's no space in there, so it'll cram it all together, but it added my 2 strings together, right? And so I can type out concat, or I can do something like this, where I just do A plus B, right? And I'll get the exact same thing. And so to me, concat, like, use it if you want to, but that's one of those things where there's other ways to do it. Usually, like, I would prefer like I said, like a string literal. Personal, I try and use these wherever possible. Right. And so we can do something like this, and then I'll also have my space in there. Right. And that's how I would tackle it. But you can use concat if that's your prerogative. All right. All right. Now, the this over here. Dot includes is a little bit more useful, right? So if I say let brown fox, jumped over the lazy dog, and then I want to do includes, right? And also I want you to know, so again, because we're not in just like a word processor, technically we are in an IDE when we're on a replet, it is trying to help us, right? We've talked about this, like something like you can grab text, highlight it, and wrap it in different things. You can do multi-select. We get the color coding to help us visually separate our code, and makes it easier. Also, when you are trying to do so like a built-in method, right? And we're doing this on a string. And so it knows that it's a string. And so when I do this, when I hit that dot, it starts to give me all of the different choices that I could use here, right? So concat ends with includes. And then if I go down there, and also if I start to type, it will narrow it down to basically where I'm at, right? And so string dot includes, so search string, string position, number, undefined Boolean, right? So those are our two params. So search string, which is the string that we're going to be searching. And if position is undefined, 0 is assumed so as to search all of the string. All right, and returns true, a search string appears as a substring of the result of converting this object to a string at one or more positions that are greater than or equal to the position, otherwise returns false. It is case sensitive, right? But so this is helping me tell me what I need, right? And so when I see search string and I see string, that is my only choice. Like if I don't put anything in here, it's not doing anything. But when I see this question mark here for position, and I see number or undefined, right? Like this is telling me that this is optional. So I don't have to put the position in here. It is an optional value. If I don't use it, basically 0 is assumed, which is fine because that means we start searching from the very beginning of the string. So let's go ahead and tab that. And then, so we can do quick, right? And if we run this and we console out log index, it doesn't, index is just because of auto formatted for me. Let's go ahead and take that out of there. So that's not confusing, right? And we run this, do argument list quick, because semicolons don't exist in JavaScript anymore. There we go. We get a true, all right, which is what I would expect. Now, again, it is case sensitive. So if I put quick with a capital Q in here, I get false. All right. And so this would tell me if something is in the string or not. All right. Trim chops off any white space characters at the beginning or the end of a string. So if we look at mdn string.trim, right. Also, I just want to call out there's like a like if we scroll up here to the R's. Nope. Thought there was a right trim and a left trim. I could be wrong with that. Maybe there isn't in JavaScript, right? So what this does, and again, so same thing, this is, oh, sorry, if I come back over here and I say, let extra spaces equal right, and then we can do console.log extra spaces dot trim, right? Okay, so there is a trim left, trim right, trim end, trim start. So there's different trims here. Prints the standard out with new line. Multiple arguments can be. Oh, sorry, that's reading log still. To remove the leading and trailing white spaces and line terminator characters from a string, right? And then this is the only downside of replit is sometimes it doesn't do what you want it to do. All right, why not? And so if I run this, right? So it left the space in the middle, but I have no space after, and I have no space in the front anymore. It's hard to see that the ones after have been removed, but they have been removed, right? And so if we come back down here, right, so we've got trim end. So trim right is just an alias of trim end. And so I'm going to guess trim left is an alias of trim start, right? But with that, if we see that, so like trim left, it just chops it off the front. If we go back here to trim end, it just chops it off the end and leaves it on the front, right? So you can do both sides, one side or the other. Excuse me. All right. And on number methods, so again, we used two fixed yesterday, and there was a little bit of a trap there where two fixed takes our number and it returns a string, right? And then also, without using two fixed or changing anything, we can also pass to a, like we can convert a number to a string. We can convert floats to strings, like, so there's all different ways to pass things back and forth. All right. So let's look at number. Right. And so if we look at the, is finite, is an integer, is not a number, safe integer, parse float, parse int. So to string, right? So we can look at something like this, where so math absolute value of c dot to string 16, right? And so this is building like a little hex color converter. But at the end of the day, like it is actually outputting a string here, right? And so we can say let num1 equal that, and we can do console.log num1, right? And there's our number. And same thing down here, if we do to string. Right, so now again, it went from gold to white. So it is now a string over here. Right, and so if I do console.log num1 again, see how I get my number? So I did not change num1 to a string. Right here, I just said, take num1, change a copy of it to a string and send it to the console. So I did not mutate my data. I did not make a permanent change. I just made a copy of it, made that copy a string, sent it to the console, and then discarded my copy from the program, right? It's nowhere else. It doesn't exist anywhere. I call num1 again immediately, and I'm right back to my number. So if I want this to be stored somewhere where I can use it multiple times, right? Like I have to save it to a variable. So I could say string of num1, right? Whoops, not a minus, we need an equal. And now if I do something like this, right? Now it's there, and I don't know, I was trying to give me that 0. It's saved. So I can call this over and over and over again. And each time it's referencing the value that's stored in that variable, which is the copy of num1 sent to string. All right. But num1 is never changed. Even after I do this 4 times, I come back down here, look at num1 is still a number. All right. And so this is a built-in method that does not mutate the original data. All right, so arrays, lots of built-in methods on arrays that you'll use while you're solving algorithm challenges. All right, so let's go ahead and we'll grab a copy of these. All right, so we'll say let R1 equal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These out. Whoops. All right, so with this one, if I do console.log R1, right? So there's my array. Just comment these out. No, that's how about that? All right, looks good. All right, so when I console.log my array, I get the entire array here. And if I want to see just a portion of it, remember, we can give it an index value and we'll drill down to the individual value inside. So this is just an array of numbers, 1 through 5. And now if I want to add an additional element to it here, I can use, or I'm sorry, dot pop. Yeah, I'm sorry. Sorry, I keep saying dot pop, but we're doing dot push first. I apologize. So for dot push, I can assign or push additional elements into the array. All right. And so let's go ahead and just start with 6 here. When I run this, whoops, sorry, I don't want to console.log that. I just want to run it right here. And now R1. All right. So now see that the 6 is in there. And so when I ran dot push, notice I'm not console.logging dot push. I am still console.logging array1. I have mutated my array, right? I have permanently added a value to it. And it doesn't matter how many times I do this, that value is in my array until I go in and do something to delete the value from the array. All right, so dot push, mutates my array. All right. And so let's go over here. Let's take a look at it in MDN. Right. The push method array instance adds the specified elements to the end of the array and returns the new length of the array. All right. And so it does still have a return value, but the return value is the new length of the array, right? So what it returns is the equivalent of running R1 dot length, right? That is the return value for this. So if I do wrap this in a console.log, I'm not going to get the entire array. I just get the length, right? See, I get 6 because that's my new length. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right. And so console.logging the actual push doesn't really help me out that much. But seeing my array after I mutated it does. And so let's go ahead and do something. This. Any questions on push? Okay. So push is the exact come on. Sorry. Pop is the exact opposite of push. All right. So console.log R2. And when we run this, right, I've now popped off the last element in my array. So the 5 is gone, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 is gone. Now with this actually returns the value that is popped off, right? So if I need to save that value for later, then I could do something like this, where I say let removed element equal R2.pop. And now I can console.log removed element and I've saved that element that I've popped back off there, right? And then I could do the same thing. So I could say R2 dot push removed element console.log R2, right? And now, so I've popped it off, there it is, I've saved it, I can reference it later in my program. And then I go back and I reference it and I add it right back to the end of my array. Any questions on push? Okay, shift and unshift are basically the exact same thing as push and pop, except that they are taking it from the front of the array. All right, so this, this. And so now I could say R3 dot shift. And I believe, is it, I always get these two confused. Shift removes the first element, so I don't need to give it anything. Okay, and so now if I say console.log R3, right, so there's my array with the one missing. And same thing if I'm repetitive with this, so if I do it again, right, there's my array again with the two missing, and I could keep going until everything's gone. Right, and then same thing with unshift. If I do for unshift, I have to give it something, so I could give it a 0, right? And then we'll console.log R4. This and this out. Right, and so there's my 0 at the beginning. So again, push, pop, shift, unshift are all doing, well, so push and unshift are doing the same thing, just at opposite ends, and then pop and shift are doing the same thing, they're just doing it at opposite ends of the array. All right, so next is slice.
I have a
And
question.
yes, go ahead.
How do you clear a whole array? Like you don't want anything in it.
If you just want the array to be empty,
Yes.
so the easiest way to do that would be to do R4 equals that, right? And I've now reassigned it to an empty array. However, if I need to pull each item out one at a time, then it would be what we kind of talked about yesterday, right? So we could do we'll just write a for loop, right? So for let I equal 0, or actually it wouldn't be a for loop, it'd be a while loop. We could say while R4 dot length is greater than 0. And then we could say R4 dot pop, and we could console.log this so that we see it happen, right? So now if we run this, right, there's me pulling each of these out, and then I could say console.log R4, right, and there's my empty array. But if I don't need to take each individual element out at a time, I would just do something like this, where I say R3 equals an empty array. So now I've reassigned it to an empty array. And then if we uncomment one of these and run it, there's my empty array up at the top.
Okay. Can you like say specify like an index and remove whatever's in that index? So say the midpoint which would be 3, how would you remove 3?
So I believe there's a couple of different ways to do this. So I don't know if there's a built-in for it. Every filter find. Well, let's see here. Is there so what my guess is, I mean, well, let's see here. Is there a built-in method for array that will delete a specific element? Right, and so there isn't. Oh yeah, I guess, well, we haven't talked about it yet, but basically splice will do it. And that is slice and then splice, so that's 2 away. So splice would do it. You could basically, yeah, splice would be the best way to do it. And we'll cover that after we cover slice. Slice and splice are a little bit more complicated, and splice is a little bit more complicated than slice. Slice makes a copy. I think splice makes a copy as well, but we'll take a look at it when we get to that one. So let me do slice and splice, and then if you've still got a question, or if you don't feel like it answered your question, we can keep going from there. All right, so slice, and actually, sorry, before I do that, let me just comment this out and got rid of that. Okay, cool. So slice, so do array prototype slice. All right, so the slice method of an array instance returns a shallow copy of a portion of an array into a new array object selected from start to end, and not included where start and end represent the index of the items in the array. The original array will not be modified. So again, we do not basically modify the original array. And it also returns a shallow copy, which I will include a link to this. You can read more into what this is, but basically a shallow copy, when we start talking about shallow copies, we're talking about how JavaScript references the underlying values in memory, right? And there's a shallow copy and a deep copy. I'm not going to go in class too deep into either of these, because you do not need to know this to make it in, like, basically pass the application to get into Code Platoon. One thing that I will point out, though, that is a little bit of an oddity, and is basically the way that things are referenced in JavaScript. So if I say console.log 1 triple equals 1, what should I see? What do I expect to see in my console over here? Anyone want to take a stab at that? What does 1 strictly equal to 1 resolve to? True. Okay, that's what I would hope to see. Right, there's my true. Now, if I do something like this, I get false. All right, and that is because when you're trying to compare arrays, these are actually, even though they have the same values, they're both an array, they're the exact same length, they have the same values, the same types, everything, they're pointing to different memory references, and so they will show false. So, and again, I don't want to get it too far into the nuts and bolts of why this is. You can dig further into this if you choose to, but again, you don't need to know why this happens to pass the application or to get started in coding. This is more of an advanced concept, just know that if you're trying to compare two arrays to each other, there's actually a lot more work to it. You would have to go through and compare each value in the array to make sure that it contains the same values in the same order and that they're both the same length for you to determine that's true. Now, there's already some stuff out there that is built to help you with that. Like if you're using testing, so like if you're writing tests for your software, which you'll learn about further down the road, that has like basically a function built into it that will check if two values are the same, but then a different function built into it, like if you're trying to compare two arrays or two objects to each other. Right, but just know that comparing arrays in JS can be trickier than it appears. All right, and I'll leave this down here. And we'll say this is return false. All right, so just be wary if you're trying to compare two arrays. All right, now for slice, let's go ahead and grab this over here. And notice that slice you can put one number in there, you can put two numbers in there, you can even put negative numbers in there, or you can put no numbers in there, right? And so when we look down here at the syntax, we can run slice with a start, or we can run slice with a start and an end. Okay, start, and this tells you all of what it needs to be, and if you don't put a start in, 0 is used. And then if start is greater than or equal to the array.length, so if the array has a length of 5 and you put a start of 6 in there, you're starting after the array, nothing, basically nothing is extracted. And kind of a quick description of what you can put into n, and then the return value is a new array containing the extracted elements. All right, and so if we take a look at this and we say animals, and we've got ant, bison, camel, duck, elephant. All right, is this, can I turn this thing off? It was driving me nuts. All right, and now it'll stop giving me bad suggestions. All right, so if I console.log animals, I get my entire array. All right, so there's my entire array. Remember, every time we're dealing with an array, we know that we have index values. So I've got 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So 5 elements in here. So my length is 5. And that's what we've got. And so if I do dot slice, again, if I don't put anything in dot slice, I get my entire thing. Now, if I put in a 1, right, notice how ant is no longer there. So I basically said, I want everything in this array starting at the element that is in the first index position going till the end. All right, and if I do a 3 here, right, so now I've added a start and an end. Right, I get bison and camel. Right, so skip this one, start at 1, give me this one, and then because I put a 3, but notice how I didn't get duck, right? So 1 is inclusive, ending is exclusive, right? And so I do not get the element that I stop counting at. I do get the element that I start counting at, but not the one that I stop counting at. Don't worry about if you have a challenge where you need to get the center 3 things of the index, throw in a start and an end, and if you're like, run it, see what you actually get. If you're off, then you can start adjusting your numbers, right? Like maybe I only wanted bison, so I know that I got bison and camel, so I went 1 too far, I back it off 1, now I've got bison. All right, now where you can trip yourself up is if I want the last element, or so if I want the last two elements in this array, right? And I want basically, no matter what they are, I want the last two elements. So if I say I'm going to start counting at 3, and I'm going to, or actually, I'm sorry. So let's say I just want camel and duck. All right. So if I start counting at 3 and I stop counting at 4, whoops, at 5, right? I get duck and elephant. So there's that. And if I want to back this up one, so I can do 2 and 4, right? So there's camel and duck. Now, basically, this is, I'm always counting from the front here, right? Notice how when we were doing this, we saw an example here where there was a -1, right? And so you can also, and also a -2 here in this one, right? So with slice, we can actually count from the back, right? And where that's helpful is if I want the last two elements, and right now I've got, well, let's see if I change to 3 and 5, right? And I run this, I will get my last two elements. I will get duck and elephant, right? Now, if I add cat to the end of this, I'm no longer getting the last two elements in my array. I'm still getting duck and elephant, right? But if I do something like this, where I put a -2 in there, I'm counting from the back, right? And I'm grabbing the last two elements from the back. And so now I've got the last two elements. If I delete this, back off here, I'm still getting the last two elements. So it follows along as the array changes size. All right. And you will, I don't know that there's any challenges where you'll run into this explicitly in this course, but there's definitely, as you branch out, there's lots of algorithm challenges where you have to be careful, like what side of the array that you're trying to chop off. Any questions on slice? All right. So now for splice. And splice, as I said, is a little bit more complicated than slice because slice, again, you're just taking a subsection of the array. Well, not too spliced. I just want splice. Right. The splice method in array instance changes the contents of an array by removing or replacing existing elements and or adding new elements in place. To create a new array with a segment removed or replaced without mutating the original array, use toSpliced. To access part of an array without modifying it, see slice. All right. So slice makes a shallow copy. And I guess that's the other thing. Let me illustrate that real quick, right? So if when I do this and I'm doing animals.slice, if I console.log animals again, I get the whole array, right? Like this is not making any permanent change to the animals array. All right, so if we take a look at splice, let me grab that. And so with splice, like I said, we can get a little bit more, going a little bit more in depth here, right? So we've got a start, we've got a delete count, and then we've got item. And this is just showing the example that you can add as many additional items as you'd like to. And so what this is doing, when I give slice some or splice something like this is saying count to 1, right? So go to the first index, which is March, don't delete anything, and then insert this element. All right, so let me just grab this here real quick. And we'll console.log months. These two, right? So now to notice how now February is in there, right? So we counted to the first index, we didn't delete anything, and then we inserted something, right? And so for something like this, right, where we would have to get more complicated depending on the length of the array, right? But we know that like March is in the middle here right now. So if I wanted to, I could do console.log and we could say, or I'm sorry, not console.log, we'll do months.splice, right? And so we can go 0, 1, 2, right? So I'm going to go to the second index position here, and I'm going to delete 1, and I don't want to insert anything, right? And if we console.log months here again, right, I get Jan, Feb, April, June, right? So that would be how slice could go in and basically go out and delete something in the middle, right? And with that, you could also do something like this. So we could say, let index of April, so like where it's not specifically in the middle, right? And we could say let index of April equal months dot index of April. Oops, let's put that as a string, April. Let's go ahead and console.log that. Right, 3. And now instead of basically like putting in a hard-coded number there, I could say index of April, right? And now, and then count to the index of April and then delete 1 item. Right, so now Jan, Feb, March, and now April is missing, right? So that's how I would use splice to, and then also index of, so I'm using 2 built-in methods to locate a specific element within my array and then delete it. Did that answer your question about deleting something in the middle?
Yeah, it did. So I have another question. For line 65, you put let index of April. It doesn't have to say index of April. Like it could be anything, right? That's
Yeah,
just
you
the
could call
variable that
this
you.
whatever. I'm just,
Okay. Yeah.
so I don't want to set too many bad habits, but like when I'm doing examples in class, like sometimes I write very short variable names.
Mm-hmm.
Very short variable names are horrible. All right, because like you don't want to, you want to avoid them at all costs. The only time you ever use like a 1-letter variable name is when you're doing like I said, like a for loop, right? So we do for let I equal 0, right? Like that's okay. Everyone knows what the I is. It's the same thing in every for loop. And but this A could be Charles, it could be hamburger, it could be the like whatever, a prime number, whatever you could think of. It could be an array, it could be an object, it could be any of these things. A doesn't tell me what I'm expecting that value to be in, or what that value could be in. Like it would be much better if I did like first name, right? And same thing, like this would be last name. And let's do this so it doesn't throw an error later if anyone copies it. Right, and so and that's better. And so a long time ago, so like when computers were like the very first computers were, I mean, were people, right? And then we got into like electromechanical and tube computers that were like the sizes of warehouses, to like we started doing like when people used to write code, like they would actually type them on punch cards, that would punch little holes out in punch cards, and then you take the punch cards and feed them into a machine, and it read the holes like a scantron, and that's how you got code into a computer. Then we got into, I don't know where everyone falls in age, but I remember being very young in the mid 80s and having a Commodore 64 that was by like today's standards, like a brick, and like trying to type in computer programs in Visual Basic. And if you got one thing wrong, like the whole thing was shot because we didn't have the disk drive to save anything, right? Like, and it was literally just on screen memory. Like if it wasn't on the screen, it didn't exist anymore. To like having very limited screen space to now having unlimited for what we're doing. We have unlimited processing power. We have unlimited screen space. Keystrokes are free. They're easy to type. So when we're using variables, I would rather see a longer variable name that tells me what the story is than something that is basically just like the letter A or the letter B that leaves me guessing. And again, I'm writing simple code right now, and like things that are not like overly complicated. So you're only seeing like one thing of it on the screen, right? And so if I do documents, have you got any React projects? All right, so like this is React. This is the framework that you'll learn in Code Platoon. Like, so this is the JavaScript front end framework. So this is all JavaScript, but like now we're starting to get into things that are a little bit more complicated, right? And I can't see everything I'm working with at one time in the screen, or that they're going across several different files within the application that are talking to each other, right? And so I want like, I don't want like a URL that just says like pub or something like that, because that doesn't tell me what it is, versus like calling it public URL, especially if I'm all the way down here referencing public URL again. I know I have a much better idea of what I'm working with. All right. And so like this is like, if you're going to save a variable that's the index of something that you're specifically targeting, this would be a good name for it. Right. So and maybe you do something like that, or something like you cut the E out if you're trying to save characters or something, but like I want to see good long verbose names that tell me a story within the code, because it may not make a big deal here if we use X, Y, A, B, but eventually that's going to become a bad habit that's going to make your life a lot more difficult. But I mean, yes. And also like I could call this, right? So like I could call this hamburger, right? And I'll run this code and it still works. But just because it works, like it doesn't help me figure out what's going on here. And let's see here. Okay, so and with Splice, so let me go ahead and comment that out and comment this out. All right, so with that, so this again, we count in, we can delete things, we cannot delete things, right? And then we can also add things with Splice. And Let's take this and throw this in the notes for everyone. Any other questions on splice? Okay, so index of, we actually just covered up here, right? So I can say something like this. So R5. And we can say console.log index, oops, R5.index of, and we'll say 3, and that should return a 2 for me. And there's my 2. It's pretty straightforward. Join, so join, it joins all the elements of an array into a single string. So this one you will definitely be using in your challenges. All right, so if I take that should be a good example of one I can grab in the join. All right, so let's grab this. So again, join method array instance creates and returns a new string by concatenating all of the elements in the array separated by commas or specified separator string. If the array has only one item, then that item will be returned without using the separator. All right, and so I can just run join, or I can run join with a separator. If a string that separate each pair of adjacent elements in the array, if omitted, the array elements are separated with a comma. All right, so an easy way to make some CSV here. So if I take this and I say const elements, fire, air, water, and then I say elements dot join. I don't put anything in there. And I run this. So I get fire, air, and water as a string separated by commas. If I don't put, if I just put an empty string in here, it gets all smashed together with no spaces between it. And if I put a space in here, right, I get each word separated by a space. And I mean, you can go nuts in here. Right, and each word will be separated by all my asterisks and underscores. But most commonly, you'll either see it as right. So most of the time when you see join, you'll see it either with an empty string or just one space in there. Any questions about join? Okay.
Oh, I do have.
Now, for each in map.
I think somebody had a question.
Oh, sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can now.
Okay, so once you join, the new array is just that, but it doesn't change anything, right?
Correct. So
Okay.
when we look at join, right? So join method array instance creates and returns a new string, right? So we're creating a string separated by commas if the array. Actually, let me, before I just say sure, let me run this here real quick, right? So we've got that, there's that, and then if I console.log elements a second time, I would hope to see that I still have an array there, right? And I do. So if I want to use this as a string, I then need to save this, right? So let string of elements equal elements.join, right? And now I can reuse this again in the future. So console.log string of elements, right? So there's my string, there's my array.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Okay, so I'm going to talk about for each and dot map briefly here. Again, yesterday we talked about this. Like, I don't want you to get overly concerned with for each or dot map yet. until you're comfortable writing for and while loops. All right. So for each is a method and array instances executes and provided function once for each element in the array. All right. And so for each, basically, you need to write a callback function. So again, that's a new term we haven't really talked about yet. Right. So this is a callback function. It's a fat arrow function. We don't have like the actual like let or const here and write the name. Is literally just like a anonymous callback function that you feed a parameter into, which is going to be each element in the array. And then it goes through each element of the array. And so if we run this, we get A, B, and C, right? It's just console.logging A, B, and C. And so if we look down here, callback function and the arg, right? So a function to execute for each element in the array, its return value is discarded. The function is called with the following arguments. So again, the return value is discarded. So it doesn't return anything, right? Return is none, undefined. And this is where it can get confusing if you want to use a dot map or a for each, because the map method of an array instance creates a new array populated with the results of calling a provided function on every element in the array. All right. So basically, for each, we'll go in and do something. Console.log, you multiply it once it's done, it's gone. It's a one-time event and it doesn't return anything. The dot map will go in and do something to each element in the array, right? So if we look at this, so we're saying X, so that's the each element is X. We iterate through or we loop through this array and we multiply each of these numbers by 2. And then the return value of this is actually an array of all of the numbers doubled, right? So we've saved the return value to map.1. If we were to save the for each to a, all right, so if I say let example equal this, right? And then I console.log example, I should just get undefined, right? And I just get undefined here. So this does something and then it's done, it's over with, it doesn't return anything. Dot map does something and then will actually return an array with all of the changes present. Okay, there we go. But again, I don't want to get too deep into either one of these because again, you don't need them to pass the application. And until you're comfortable using for and while loops, I would rather that you avoid them. All right. So I believe that is it for our slides. It is 7:04. So let's go ahead. Oh, well, and any questions for me on any of the array built-ins that we covered so far tonight? Anyone, anything? Okay. Then what I'm going to do is we'll call it 7:05. Let's go ahead and take a break and we'll be back at 7:12 p.m. And we'll get into challenges for the evening. All right, everyone, welcome back from the break, 7:13 p.m. Central Time. We've got a question here about what it looks like to do multiple built-in methods at the same time. And that's a great question. There's a couple of different ways that we could do that. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at something here. So we'll say, let's make an array. And sorry, I forgot to close my door when I was walking into the bedroom. All right, so let's create an array here and we'll say, let array, we'll call it big names. All right, and so we'll go Charles Jenny, Melissa, Jeff, and we'll do Keith. All right. So if we console.log big names, right? Like I would expect to see an array of all caps names up here, which is what I see. Now, if I wanted to just have a comma separated list of names that also have a space in between them, I could do something like this. So I could do join. And remember, if I just do a comma, or I don't put anything in there, there won't be any space in there, right? So I could do comma space. All right. So there's that. Now I could go, we'll say a string of names, and we could do that. And now if I wanted to see those in lowercase, right, I could then do string of names dot to lowercase. I think that's it. Whoops, console.log. Right, and so there's that. So now I've ran two of these on different ones. And however, you can string these together, right? So I can do something like this and then just console.log string of names, and I get the same thing. Right, and I don't need to save this as a separate variable, so I could just do something like this. Right, and without saving to a variable, I've just got it this one time. So I'm console.logging a copy of my array that I've joined and then sent all of the values to lowercase in there. All right, and you can keep going and going and going and going. And now these are specific on order, right? Because this is converting my array to a string, and then this is a built-in on a string. So I can't flip-flop these, right? So if I do something like this, I should get an error. Right? Two lowercase, big names, two lowercase, not a function. So this is telling me that this is not a function, a built-in method available on an array. All right, and also usually depending on what we're doing here, this would probably get stretched out a little bit, where I would do something like this and then like that, where these can go on separate lines and they still work, right? And if I had another one to do, I would do the next method, whatever it is, right? And like I could keep going and keep going with it. Right, but that's how I would do two of them at the same time.
All right, thank you.
Yep. All right, so let's go ahead and any other questions on any of the built-in stuff that we covered tonight? Anything from session 1, 2, whatever, feel free to throw it out there. If not, let's go ahead and take a look at a challenge. All right, so and we will skip some of these, like mortgage payment is, there's nothing to it. Same thing with like some of the triangles and rectangles here. Yeah, you can feel free to swing around and do these on your own time. But I usually try and pick the challenges with like the most impact. Now, normally I would like to lead off with one, but I think doing the convert hours to minutes, I would like you guys to do that as a group. The class is much smaller tonight. So I think we could get it down to like maybe like 3 groups of 4 here. And we could work out in groups, but I will still go through it with everyone before I turn you to. And again, no one, I know some of the groups finished yesterday, no one ever really sent me a message. Please, if you've got questions, because once you're in the breakout rooms, you can't message me directly in Slack anymore. Send me a message on here, either at me an intro to coding or just send me a direct message. Wherever I'm at on here, there's me, right? So just at Charles Kubiak or find me, go to direct message, send a direct message, type my name in, there I am, right? Send me a message, say, hey, our group's stuck, or hey, our group is finished, and I will give you kind of like an extra stretch goal. If the other groups are still working, or if all 3 groups are done, I can pull you back in, and that way we can keep the class moving and we can get more challenges done. All right, so again, we click on it over here, opens up in our Replit account. We need to fork it. I'm gonna fork the REPL, bring it over here. We've got our prep block up at the top. And grab this. And grab, I think, these 2 as well. So we want read, so I want this one as well. All right, so remember Control D or Command D will multi-select. We're gonna grab the whole thing. We're gonna put them in console.logs. And then we'll come over here. And multi-select these, delete them, put in our triple equals, run it, get a bunch of falses, what we would expect. All right, so yesterday we finished up with converting minutes to hours. So now we have a function that is asking us to take in a number of minutes and returns a string of hours and minutes, right? So no decimals this time. We're actually going to be writing a string that basically contains the hours and the minutes. So if we take a look at this, we're getting 1 parameter, which is a number that represents total minutes. All right, and we're going to return a string that tells us the number of hours and minutes in a specific format. All right, example, see below. All right, so pseudocode time. And we need to figure out how to break this apart, right? So we need to, how do we calculate the number of whole hours from the total minutes we are given? How do we then calculate the minutes left over after we've counted for whole hours? If I have more than 1 or 0 of minutes or hours, it is plural. If I only have 1 minute or 1 hour, it is singular. All right. So how do I solve for plural singular based on number of minutes, hours? All right. So with this, right, I need to divide the total number of minutes by something. And then we float and round it down to a whole number, integer. All right. So that's going to be the first step. All right. So this is a pretty decent amount of pseudocode here on how to get started with this. And we've got some good examples down here. This might not fit all in one Slack message. So let me do this, dump that. Okay, took that, and then I got this. And then I'll also take this whole thing, and for the time being, I will come back over here to intro to coding, and I will do this and drop that in there. And that's available for anyone to grab out of intro to coding. So let me go ahead and pause the recording. Or actually, I'm sorry, before I pause the recording, any questions on the pseudocode I wrote or what the challenge that we're working with is here? And also, let me throw this out to you. Do you guys think you're ready to tackle this one as a group if I give you, say, a half hour to work on it? Or would you like me to lead the class through this one? If it seems like too much too soon.
I think we can try it.
Okay. Sweet. We got 2 for the groups. So that's that. Let me pause. All right, everyone, welcome back to the what's this one? Convert to hours and minutes challenge. All right, we had about 25 minutes to work on that one, and all the groups made some progress on it. So let's go ahead and go over the solution as a group. And so I'm going to take this step by step. All right, so we already did our prep work. Let's go ahead and we're just going to console.log minutes. Right. And so there's my 125, 175, or 75, 55, 121 false. All right. So I'm just going to comment these out to make it a little less noisy for right now. And we're just going to look at one of these and make sure that we're getting this one working. Come on, Replit. There we go. All right. So let's go ahead and start doing some math here, right? So I know that there's 60 minutes inside of an hour. So if I'm trying to calculate how many hours I have, let's start by dividing by 60. Let me refresh my page here because this is going slow. Everyone can hear me okay?
Yep, sound is good.
Cool.
Yeah, gotcha.
It's not me and my internet connection going bad. I think it's Replit acting up. Okay.
Yeah, I had to reload the challenge, and it took quite a bit for it to keep going.
There we go. All right. So it's not me, it's you, Replit. That's fine. or not fine because it's, all right. So what I'm actually going to do, I'm just to get away from Replit for right now. I am going to do this in VS Code. It will look the same. I'll be doing all the same button pushing and everything like that. I just won't have to deal with this. And then what I'll do is once I'm done, I'll take my solution and copy and paste it back in here so everyone still has access to it. All right, so we'll go to documents. This one is convert hours minutes, JS. All right, we're in business, and let me make this bigger. Is this readable for everyone?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, cool. And then basically, no, I have no idea if I can pull this to the side. I'm not gonna mess with it right now. It'll just be down here. But so node and then convert. All right, right. So it's the console, it's just down here instead of on the side, but we get the same things. Right. So I divided by 60 and I get my big long repeating decimal here. Now, there are lots of ways that we can get this to like basically chop this off, right? So we can do like the way I would usually handle this is I would probably just do parse int. Right. And so if we do that and we run it, I just get the 2. But also, let me just do this here real quick. So if I parse int 2.999, right? And so I want to make sure that parse int actually rounds down every time. Because if it doesn't, I don't want to use that. All right. So even at 2.999, it rounds down every time. So I only end up with my whole hours. Right. So I could do parse int. I could do floor division. I could do, I think, math. And so math is the math interface for JavaScript, and there's lots of different things built into math, right? So JS, math, right? So round, random, we'll do MBN, right? So all sorts of stuff in here, right? So ABS is absolute value, right? Like it looks like we're getting into some trigonometry here, ceiling, floor, right? So math.floor static method always rounds down and returns the largest integer less than or given to an equal number. So 5.95 turns to 5. So math.floor would be perfect here. Math.trunk, right? Static method returns the integer part of a number by removing any fractional digits, right? So 13.37, 42.84 turned into 13 and 42. So there's multiple different things that we could do to get basically just to where we need to be. And so I'll just leave it as math.trunk right now. And let me put this back in. So we're going to say minutes divided by 60. All right, and let's go ahead and run our code. And I get 2. And if I've got 125 minutes, I know I'm looking for 2 hours. So this looks good to me. So I can take this out of my console.log and I'll say let hours equal this, right? And so now I've taken it out of the console.log, it's in the variable. And then now I need to basically get my remaining minutes. So same thing here, console.log. And let's go ahead and say 125, or sorry, not 125 minutes. And how can we get basically the minutes that are left over after we take our whole hours out of here? Now, there's a couple of different ways to do this as well, right? So I could do something like this. So I could do minutes minus hours times 60, right? Because I know that's going to be 2 times 60 is 120. 125 minus 120 is going to give me my 5 minutes left over. So this would be the perfectly acceptable way to do it. All right, so if I run this, so there's my 5. What's another way that I could do this? Did anyone else get through this part with a different operator?
We did modulo 60.
Okay, yep, so the remainder operator, or some languages will call it the modulo, and JavaScript we call it the remainder operator, right? And so we could do, get rid of this, and we could just do console.log minutes remainder 60. So 60 goes into 125 2 times, and then the 5 will be left over. That'll be the remainder. So this is a good way that to get that as well. So now exact same thing, let remaining minutes equal minutes remainder 60. All right, so now I've got my hours and my minutes here. So what I'm going to do is just solve for this one right here, right now. All right, so let's go ahead and return, and I'm going to use a string literal, and I'm going to say hours, and then hours, and remaining minutes. All right, and let's go ahead and return this, or yeah, we'll go ahead and do this. All right, so I get a true, okay, and so I'm passing my first test. Let's go ahead, uncomment this one. I'm passing both of them. All right, let's go ahead and uncomment this one. All right, so now notice we only have 1 hour, so I'd expect that I would fail this time, and I do. Right, so let's go ahead and take this string literal that I've got here, and let's console.log it. So let's see what it looks like in the console down here. All right, and I'm just going to focus in on this one for right now. Let me pull this up a little bit. All right, so I've got 1 hour and 15 minutes. So I need to start dealing with this being plural. Anyone have any thoughts on how I could do this? And I know at least one person is going to groan once I show you how to do it. All right, so let's go ahead and we'll call this let our units equal, and we're going to do this as a ternary operator, right? And so we'll say hours triple equal to 1, and then here's our ternary, and we'll say either blank or just S. And actually, you know, I'll just make this a little bit easier. I'll put whole words in here so it tells a little bit better story. So either hour or hours. Now, what I can do is I can take this and I can say hour units. All right. And now, if it is equal to 1, only when I have 1 hour will it say hour. And if it says anything other than 1 hour, I will have either 0 hours or 2 or greater hours. All right, so let's go ahead and run this. Well, this will still fail because I didn't change it down here. Right, so now it's true. Let's make sure I didn't break anything. So let's uncomment these 2 up here. Yep, so true, true, and true. All right, 2 hours and 5 minutes, 2 hours and 55 minutes, 1 hour and 15 minutes. Let's go ahead and uncomment this one. I get true, so I'm calculating correctly for hours, so 0 hours and 55 minutes. And then when I uncomment this one, I've got a false again, and it's for the exact same reason, right? So I can do this, so I can say, we'll just call this minute units, and we'll call this minute and minutes. All right, and then we'll pop this out of here. And we'll call this minute units. Let's go ahead and run it one last time here. Oops, I get a false still get my 1 minutes because I did it. Let's see, I only did it in one spot. Holy cow. There we go. Minute units. All right, so I've got, and because I left this as hours instead of changing it to minutes, and it needs to be remaining minutes. There's my true. So I'm getting true for all of them. All right, so I'm going to comment this out because I don't need it to solve my challenge. And there's all of my trues.
You're waiting for the groans. Oh my goodness.
Again, I will always point back to, remember, every time you fork it after the first time, it gives you a number. Right, so I'm on convert hours to minutes for my 11th run through. I can probably solve it on a whiteboard with my hands tied behind my back at this point. So, but this is how you would solve this one. Any questions on what I did here? Let me grab this and we'll throw it back over here. And that way you'll still have access to it after class.
So the ternary, it reads the same as any if or conditional statement. You're just shortening it up, right?
Not any conditional statement.
Well,
it is an if-else statement specific,
okay.
right? Because a conditional statement can be an if statement or it can be an else-if statement as well.
Else if. Okay.
Yep. So it is basically a shorthand if-else statement, right? We're going to evaluate something and we're going to have an if true, else this.
Okay.
Right? And you can't write like a ternary without something on the other side. Like it has to have the colon, it has to have two sides to it.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions on what I did here? All right, let's go ahead and look at the next one. So we're going to skip right triangle and let's go ahead and do the SpaceX countdown. So click on it, fork it, bring it over. You know, Replic's struggling tonight. There we go. All right, write a function that takes an integer as seconds and prints how many seconds there are until liftoff. And once there are 0 seconds left, have it return liftoff. All right, and let's take a look here. So we'll use this as the example. And I'm also not letting anyone off the hook. We aren't going to have 1 second. We're only going to have 1 second. All right, so I'm going to take in one parameter, which is a number that represents and I am going to, so the return is a little different here. So I am returning one thing, which is a string that says liftoff. All right, so that is the only thing that you're returning here, right? So write a function that takes in an integer as seconds and prints, or in JavaScript speak, console.logs how many seconds there are until liftoff. And once there are 0 seconds left, have it return liftoff. All right. So this will be coming from a console statement, and this will be your return. Okay. And we'll say see below. All right. And then we need console.log countdown. And we'll just say 5, like the example. And so now for pseudocode, right? How do we get the computer to do the same thing over and over again until we tell it to stop? What building block is that? Yep. And Bianca in the chat, it's a loop, right? So, and if we're counting down, what would be a good loop? Yep. Robert, you're right. You're already a step ahead of me. So we're going to be looking at probably using a for loop for this one. You could do it as a while loop. So it's really whichever one you're comfortable with. But with this one, I would say, because I know I'm counting down, I would do a for loop. All right. And so, but again, like if you want to solve it with a while loop, I'm not gonna twist anyone's arm with it. All right. So I know I need to repeat my countdown and decrement by 1 each time. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All right. And once I'm done looping, I will then need a return statement that puts out my liftoff string. Puts out that returns my liftoff string. All right, so the trick to this one is figuring out how to construct your loop correctly and make sure that you're counting down from the first number and getting all the way down to 0. Deal with singular versus plural for 1 second. All right, and that'll carry over from the previous challenge. So let me go ahead and grab this. I'm going to drop this in the chat. All right, it's in the chat. It is in the intro to code. Right, so there's that. And let me pause. All right, we'll give Replit a second shot here. So welcome back for the SpaceX Countdown Challenge. We're going to go over it as a group and class now. So as always, we're going to start off just by making sure that we can see what's going on here, right? So I'm going to console.log seconds. And I get 5 and I get my undefined. I know that I need to return liftoff. So let's go ahead and get that out of the way. Right? So we'll say liftoff. Let's just like that. All right. And there we go. So now we're returning liftoff. So we're doing good there. And so now I need to figure out how to iterate down through my seconds, right? And so let's go ahead and take a look at a for loop. And we'll say for let I equal, and we'll actually say seconds. And because we're going to start at seconds and then we're going to count down to 0. And so we'll say while I is greater than or equal to 0. And then we'll say I minus minus. All right. And so let's go ahead and console.log I here. Before I do that, let me form my for loop correctly, put my curly braces in, move this up here. And get rid of that empty space. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All right, so I know I'm counting in the right order. I've got liftoff. So let's go ahead and form our string literal here. So we're going to do that, and then we'll wrap that, and we'll say there are blank seconds left until, oops. Seconds left until lift off. All right, I'm just gonna make it 2 words because I don't know why it's 2 words here and 1 word there. All right, there are 5 seconds, 4 seconds, 3, 2, 1, 0. All right, so now we just need to solve for this. And again, this is a direct carryover from the previous challenge. And so I would just say, we'll call it a sec unit. And then we'll say if I is triple equal to 1, right? And we'll say second, or if it's not, we'll say seconds. And then we'll grab this and we'll say sec units or unit. And we'll run it again. All right, 2 seconds, 1 second, 0 seconds lift off. All right, so that was all there was to that one. Any questions on how I solve this? And if I were to do a while loop, right, I could comment out my for loop here and I could say while countdown, or we'll just say seconds is greater or equal to 0. And then we can do the same thing here. Oh, I got it. There we go. And instead of I, we'll actually call it seconds. And then we will do seconds minus minus down here. All right. And so this should work as well. And it did not. I is not defined. Seconds. All right. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 second, 0 seconds lift off. Right. So the big thing here is that we have to remember while we're doing our while loop, we have to do our decrement as an actual line of code instead of writing it inside the workup for the for loop.
Question. What if you want to say there is 1 second left?
Oh yes, same. Yep. So I got the little part, missed the big part. Thank you for calling that out. It would be the same thing. I would say is that I would, so if I really wanted to get crazy, like I would do it like this. All right. So I would say this becomes an array, and I could do there is, right? And here this would become an array as well. And I could say R. And then I could do this, and we'll call it, let's give this a better name. We'll just call this plural for right now, which probably isn't a better name, but I'm going to leave it as that. All right. And so then I could say something like this. So I could do plural 0 and plural 1, right? And so plural 0 is either going to be this, or plural 1 is either going to be this or this. Right? And so now there's 1 second left until lift off. Good catch on that. We'll do the same thing down here. This part. The sec unit down here. Right, so that's probably how I would handle this. Right, so I'm using a data structure because it's always going to be is in second, or it's always going to be are in seconds. Like I don't need to change those up. The other thing I could do is do it as a second variable if I wanted to. Any other questions about this one?
Can you put an and with the ternary or not?
And where?
Like instead, if you hadn't done the arrays, could you say is equal to 1 and
No, because the and only gets used in the conditional logic. So if I put an and here, that means that I'm looking for a second thing to be true or false.
okay. Thank you.
Yep. Right, so like this would be one way to do it. If I didn't want to use an array, I would do like let is or are, and then the reason I don't do it this way is because I basically end up having to do the same operator twice, right? And then I could peel this out of the is or out of the array, and this would just become is or are. And then same thing down here. I don't need plural 0 and plural 1. This would just become is or are. But this is probably how I would tackle this one. All right, so it is 8:45. There probably isn't enough time to break out and do one on your own and then come back and explain it. So, well, let's see here, because I would like for you guys to do remove 0 or at least take a stab at it on your own as well. And same with alphabet code. All right, so let's go ahead and I'm going to do the prep work for remove zeros now. And I will post the link to it and everything like that. But on Monday, we'll resume with remove zeros. I'll go over what I typed up again, and then I'll move everyone out into the breakout rooms, and that'll be the first challenge that you tackle on Monday. After we do the slides for Monday. That is, if Replit will let me do this. And on Monday, I'll remember to try and open up all the replets I'm planning to do before class starts. That way we don't have to sit through this. Well, Replet's trying to get its stuff together. Does anyone have any questions about any of the stuff that we covered or the previous challenges? Okay, well, I'm gonna pull this to the other screen and keep an eye on it while it's doing it. While it's doing that, and maybe we'll, depending on what's happening here, let me show you some short or some things in Slack that'll help you out. All right, so if you noticed, I posted some code in Slack in the channel, and it's formatted like code. All right, so the way that you're able to do that is by using the triple backticks, right? So, because if I just grab, let me grab this, right? So this is like with the solution. So if I take this and I just copy and paste this into Slack, when I ask for help, it's going to tell me that there's too much going on here. So let me get rid of the notes. So if, come on. If I send this, like, this is a little bit harder to read, right? So when you're asking for help or you're just sending code or saving code for yourself in Slack. So if you're not aware, you can send a direct message to yourself, right? So that's why I see me here. And you can save things in there. So like you can write code, whatever you want to do, and you can save notes in there. But whenever you're pasting code into Slack, what I recommend is that you use 3 backticks, and that will give you the formatting and put it in a code block. All right, you can also do a single backtick, like if you're just say like you need to type a variable name, right? So like my variable name, and if you do 1 backtick, it'll actually put it in gold and in like its own inline code block. So we could say something like, yeah. Right. And so this also, when someone's reading your text, like if you're asking for help, like this will make everything a little bit more readable. Now, lastly, so like let's grab this whole thing again. And when I try and put this in, I think this is telling me this is too much code for, oh no, it took the whole thing. So let's unsend it and let's do this. I'll just copy and paste it a couple of times in here. So now, oh boy, so it's taking the whole thing. I wonder if Slack, apply formatting. Apply, what is, you can do this anytime. Slack recently went through an upgrade, so I'm wondering if they made this so it got better. But yeah, like before, there used to be a limit how big of a message you could send. It looks like maybe they got rid of some of that stuff. But the other thing here is that if you do /, that brings you into kind of like the Slack command interface. And so the most popular one is Giphy, right? So you do that and send GIFs. You can do whatever you want to. There's a lot of, in my work Slack, there's a lot of screaming faces and people being defeated with Giphy. But yeah, you can, it just pulls random ones and you can refresh until you find one that you like. The other thing though, in more seriously, is snippet. And when you do snippet, it actually allows you to create a file, and you can then either let it auto detect or you can type in your language. And why this is really useful is you can create a file that basically shows up like a message and then will give you formatting, line numbers, and the color, just like we were using in IDE. So when you're asking for help, this makes it a lot easier for whoever is going to help you to read what you've got going on. Right, and looking over at my other window here, it is still, looks like it's kind of ground to a halt completely. So I think what we'll do is probably call class a couple minutes early tonight. So let me go ahead and pause this.